barbarians we call them, while all the while we timidly cling to our web like Visigoths, crouching in the ruins of Rome's faded glory and proclaim ourselves civilized. Hello and welcome back to Rehydrate. This season, we have read and will be discussing Dan Simmons' Hyperion. This is season 8, episode 6, Remembering Siri, covering part 6 and to the end of the book. The hosts have only knowledge of this book. My name is Dan.
My name is Talia.
My name is Priya.
Okay, well, Priya is going to help us with the summary for this part.
The pilgrims make it to a blood-covered Kronos keep, where they discuss a Shrike's superstition that pilgrims must come in prime numbers to be granted a wish. But with the disappearance of Het Mastine, they are now 6. As the ousters begin their war, Hoyt spots a Templar who might be Het Mastine in the distance walking towards the time tombs. The consul begins his tale with an audio recording of an old comlog. The narrator, a man named Marin, is visiting the tomb of a woman named Siri on the planet Maui Covenant. Marin and Siri were in a relationship, which occurs over a handful of reunions in which she lives an entire lifespan while he remains young, having accrued time debt due to his voyages aboard a spaceship as part of a project to build a Farcaster portal on Maui Covenant, connecting it to the hegemony. Marin meets and falls in love with Siri while on Maui Covenant. From her, he learns that many of the local population of Maui Covenant are separatists, resistant to joining the hegemony. On one of Marin's visits to Siri, they dive deep into the ocean and use a translation disc that allows them to speak with the dolphins, whom the locals refer to as the sea folk. On another visit, Marin and Siri, along with Marin's friend Mike Osho, attend a festival where Mike is set upon by separatist locals. One of them is Siri's cousin Bertal. They harass him for working under the hegemony. A fight ensues in which Mike is killed by Bertal and Bertal is killed by Marin, after which Marin flees with Siri. The story cuts back to the day Marin is visiting Siri's tomb, and we discover this is the day the Farcaster is being activated. Siri and Marin's son and grandchildren are there as well. We cut to a memory of Marin's 6th reunion with Siri when she is 70 and vacationing with Marin. She expresses her concerns that the Farcaster will destroy their culture and planet and asks if anything can be done to resist its construction. Marin informs her that nothing can stop it. Back in Siri's tomb, Marin's son Donald presents him with a box of items Siri left for him. The comlog inside the box contains several diary entries Siri has left for Marin. Marin leaves Siri's tomb and the Farcaster is turned on, but it explodes because of a bomb that Marin himself had planted. Marin's recording ends and the consul reveals that he is the grandson of Marin and Siri, or Donald's son. The consul shares that he moved up the ranks working under the hegemony, but harbored intention to destroy it from within. Eventually, he is sent to Hyperion to deal with the ousters, but becomes a double agent when he learns that the ousters are not barbarians. Furthermore, the ousters reveal that the big mistake that led to the destruction of old Earth had been planned by Technocore and made to look like an accident. When the consul returns to Maina Gladstone, he reveals most of this information, but leaves out the fact that the ousters have promised to give him a device that can open the time tombs and release the Shrike. The ousters send scientists to Hyperion to try opening the time tombs, but they refuse. The consul murders them and uses the device to release the Shrike. He then betrays both the ousters and Gladstone in the hopes that drawing the hegemony into a battle with the ousters on Hyperion will destroy the hegemony. The pilgrims come to the conclusion that the consul has actually been a triple agent and debate what to do with him. Eventually, they decide to keep going together to the time tombs as it is their best chance of survival. In the epilogue, the book ends abruptly with the pilgrims making their way to meet with the Shrike across the desert, singing a song from The Wizard of Oz.
We have a number of new characters. Marin Aspic, the consul's great-grandfather, Siri, the consul's great-grandmother, Mike Osho, Marin's friend who was killed by Siri's cousin, Donald, Marin and Siri's second son and the consul's grandfather, Alon, Marin and Siri's other son, killed by the Home Rule Council, and also Alon, the name of the consul's son, who was also killed. Lyra, the consul's sister, who was killed in a fight with rebels, and Gresha, the consul's wife, who died in bombardment.
All right, thank you. Yeah, if you guys don't mind, I'm gonna go first. My thoughts on this one, because I have stronger opinions on this chapter than I had on the whole
Please.
book, and that I hated it. Like it was terrible. Like the writing style was like incomprehensible to me. Just I mean maybe that's a a, a like a factor of like the time shifting and whatever. But like as I was reading it, I was just like I don't know, bored and confused and not interested at all. And not to mention, like the book just ends with like no conclusion. They just like walk around with like the campiest possible ending, like of them singing a song from The Wizard of Oz. Like, really? I think I said last time that I would recommend this book still, after even like some lackluster chapters. The chapters like I wasn't super into, but I was still like pretty interested in. Now it's like a hard no. Like one, like it ends in the worst possible way, and two, it doesn't even end. It's just like stops. So yeah, like this chapter like just ruined the book for me. I'm sure there's interesting parts of it that were part of the world building, and like I think I liked it better maybe after reading the summary of it rather than reading it in the moment. Kind of like the broad ideas of him, being a triple agent and doing it all because like, he doesn't want like people coming in and colonizing this world. But man, I wasn't into it at all. So I don't don't want to bring the mood down or anything, but that was just like I disliked it enough where I was annoyed by it. And I don't think I've ever experienced that in a book. So I don't
Count
know.
yourself lucky. I have often been so annoyed at books.
I was
Yeah,
going to say the same.
The Ready Player One. My goodness.
that's
The
true.
writing in that. Like
That's true.
any summary of Ready Player One, I'm like, wow, what cool ideas they're exploring. And then I open the book, I'm like, wow, what clumsy prose has been chosen to explore these fascinating ideas.
I
And
think
yeah,
maybe
I
because
think
the promise of the book was super high with me, right? Like the like we talked about last time. Like it started on a super high note. Like it had like these really interesting ideas, like the world, and just like the fact that it ended in the way that it ended, just annoyed me.
maybe we should have read it backwards, right? Like
Yeah, maybe.
start with this and then finish with the priest's tale. Um,
Yeah, maybe
Once
that's
again,
that's the
a
intention.
vicious edit is needed. Didn't mean to step on your toes, Priya, but yeah, I think we've both had the experience of being annoyed with an author. And yeah, I definitely felt like you could do better. Like I know that Dan, not our co-host Dan, Dan Simmons, we know that you can do better. And when I read Ernest Cline or Orson Scott Card, who are two writers who have great ideas and but whose prose suffers, I think that they are at the top of their capacity and they just cannot do any better. But having read this book, I know that he can do so much better. So I was also confused. I think behind the scenes, I was writing to you two, to Priya and Dan, like, sorry, I'm like late. I like picked up the first chapter and then I like put it down and then I picked it up again. And I read it in like 3 or 4 segments, which is so unusual because everything else for the podcast I've read straight through. And especially like the priest's tale, I was really gripped by, like I couldn't put it down. And then I realized in like the third or fourth time picking this up, like making conversation with whoever's around me, I'm like, I think I just am making excuses not to read. Um, yeah, it was challenging to get through this chapter. I definitely found it funny that this is probably the chapter that made Dan like the poet because he's so clear that it's not a straightforward story. And I think he's a little bit the voice of the audience. So maybe this is all building, as I know that Hyperion hasn't truly ended. It's probably just setting us up for Hyperion Cantos. Like I know it's setting us up for books 2 and 3, but it's baffling to think of this as an end, and I'm a little bit confused. Anyway, take it away, Priya.
Oh man, for once I'm glad that I'm not the person who's like just hating on everything because I'm with you on this, Dan. But I'm glad you opened us up with that because um I wouldn't necessarily say that I hated this chapter more than chapter 5, but it's on par, like equal parts hatred for both chapters. I I just I feel like this is something like a collection of short stories that was just sort of cobbled together. But when you present it as a book that is not presented as a collection of short stories, you want these stories to sort of come together in a sense. And I know that perhaps it ends the way that it does, and this book is all just world building, but I think that it didn't do enough of a good job at creating intrigue for what's to come. Like the only two stories that I cared about were the scholar's tale and the priest's tale, and they seem to have like nothing to do with the other stories. And I'm just left wondering if this is ever going to come together. It seems like someone's rough draft of a book that they have all these like interesting ideas to play with, but they haven't edited out the ones that they're going to keep versus the ones that they haven't edited out the ones that they're not going to keep versus the ones that they're going to keep. So that's like my overall feelings of the book. But to speak specifically to this chapter, I think there's too much back and forth in a stream of consciousness style, which makes sense, but I've seen it done better in most other books that I actually liked. And I think that like Siri and Marin's tales have a lot of potential because, you know, there is a level of endearment there, you know, in their interactions with each other. But what I wrote down is he really just seems more focused on her body. And every time he is with her, he's just like thinking about her 16-year-old version of her, which is ew.
Priya,
But
Priya, I have to interrupt you. She was almost 16.
all
right. Get your facts right.
Even more ew. Like he's looking at her like 70-year-old body and he's like thinking, wasn't it much better when she was like almost 16? Duh, but also ew. What does he think? Like she's going to just like stop aging? Like it seems like he can't wrap his head around that. And the fact that like it's weird because he looks at his own child in parts and thinks like, oh, look at this like old graying person. I'm like, this is your son who you've barely spent any time with.
You've never time traveled so much that your own child is 40 years older than you.
True. I speak from a place of ignorance.
Check your linear time privilege, Priya.
Fair enough. But yeah, so I feel like this entire story, which took sort of which was sort of like front and center for the consul's tale. His own story is just like told all in italics, which is like it's like an afterthought. I think this could have been the part in italics that could have been much shorter. Again, I think we got a love story that I didn't care about because it feels hollow. The characters aren't fleshed out. They're not developed, which can be the case with short stories. But again, I've read short stories where even within the span of a short story, you start to care about the characters. So
even within this book.
Yes, exactly. Like Saul Weintraub. Exactly. Yeah. The same author wrote short stories where we care about the characters.
But that's what I'm saying. That's why this chapter was frustrating, because I know that his capacity is higher than this. There's lots of unremarkable stories in both this genre and other genres where I don't hold it against the author as much. I'm like, well, you probably tried, and hey, it's better than I could probably do, so on you go. But I know that he can do so much better.
I honestly think this is like a case study in biting off more than you can chew because I feel like he's doing too much. If these stories all focused on one or two things, like another character had an experience with a cruciform or the Bacura, or another character had an experience with weird things happening with time and the time tombs, that would be a lot more cohesive. Like all these stories share a common thread, and that's how you see how they're connected and why these pilgrims are all journeying together. The other thing that I had a problem with was in the end where they're all very much a united force, but like up until that point, they all kind of hated each other. Or
They're
most of
just
them kind of
wary.
hated or were like indifferent towards each other. Um, it seems a bit like contrived to me that they're singing to the Wizard of the Oz song. A Wizard of Oz. What am I saying? To the Wizard of Oz song. Wizard of the Oz. And they don't know what that song means or what it's about. It seemed a bit like on the nose. I didn't enjoy that. Whatever he was trying to pull off with that. So the last thing I want to say is that speaking to dolphins is really, really cool. And I think that Marin's narration and his anecdotes do it an injustice when it comes to like conveying how insanely moving this should be. Because I've always been mystified by like whales and dolphins and like sea mammals. So in presenting that as a symbol of like the connection that the people of Maui Covenant have to like the I guess their natural habitat is very powerful and had the potential to be more, I felt.
So speaking of that, like this is sort of like how like I was like looking at the book, right? Like so when they talked to the dolphins earlier, like I think like the words that the dolphins speak like are unintelligible, but like I mean like they're just like random words kind of strung together. I'm sure they have some meaning, but they're in italics, right? Um, and then like I kind of skimmed through like the book to see how much longer I had, and I noticed like large sections were in italics. I'm like, oh, I guess he's gonna talk to the dolphins later on.
Oh, wouldn't
But
that be
no.
cool?
That
Yeah,
would have
so
been so much better.
Right? And I felt the same as Bria.
okay, like here's a question, like why was this section all in italics? I don't get it. Like, is there some meaning, like some literary meaning that I'm missing? Like why his like first person account of his experience, or I don't know, but whatever the perspective of the console was, like why is it all in italics?
I think maybe to just create like a visual distinction between like his part of the story and Marin's Comlog story. That's all I gathered from it.
I got the same from the priest story, like when it switches from the diary entries to the reveal that he like found Father Hoyt or Paul de Rey, sorry. Yeah, I didn't think it was like any particular literary difference. It's the same in the audiobook. There's no like affected sound over it.
Yeah, I don't get it. It just made it difficult to read, like physically, like difficult to read on my eyes.
I love your idea though, Dan, of like, oh, lots more dolphin speech because I agree with you and Priya. Like, I don't know how much it struck you guys, but like they narrated a dream, like an osmosis mask or whatever it is, allows you to spend hours or maybe forever. They didn't explore the technology enough to get the answer, but maybe indefinitely underwater, um, and converse with any animal that you can put a disc on. Like that is so cool. People would like change careers and live under the seas. Like it would be a seismic shift in human civilization if we could do that. It's so cool.
Who put this quote in here? The Martin Silenis quote, because I think we should have opened with this quote.
All right, let's take the episode over. But it is true. Priya, please do the honors.
Christ on a stick, sneered Martin Silenis. Am I the only one who can tell a straightforward story in this fucking herd? That sums it up.
That does sum it up. I like the poet so much and for his snarky little remarks in this chapter because they have this whole like hand wringing over like, oh, we're no longer in seven. And then Saul Weintraub is like, oh, well, can't we use this baby? And we have to do the math and be like, oh, they actually are still seven. And they're like, no, 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 that doesn't count. You have to come of your own free will. Oh, but she did come of her own free will once, 20 years ago. And he's just like, Jesus Christ, people, look at us. We're not pilgrims, we're a mob. Hoyt there with his cruciform. Like, we have an erg in a box. Colonel Cassad has the memory of Moneta. Like, the detective is pregnant with an unborn child and her head's full of a dead romantic poet. Our scholar has a child with the daughter he used to be. Me and my muse, the consul, whatever baggage he's brought. My God, people, we should have received a fucking group rate for this trip.
This whole book is a mob if you think about it. Like it's a hodgepodge of like all these random tales that don't ever come together like the dead romantic poet. Like
Okay, I
we
have
we
heard that there's
don't,
plot resolution in the second book. I have heard.
but I'm not going to get to the second book. I'm
That,
sorry to
yeah,
say. I'm abandoning the ship. I don't want to find out what the
Oh, I
shrike
want to
does.
know. I'm going to read the second book with or without you guys. I'd like to know.
I would sooner read a summary.
I made a prediction. I accused a baby, Priya. I can't live with that.
Well, I'm what I would love is for you to read the second book and tell us if your prediction came true or not, because I've lost all interest in this book.
A one episode spoiler cast led by me. We'll see.
maybe. Yeah, I mean, I'm up for it because I'm not reading it either.
I cannot.
I haven't heard anyone like. I mean, I kind of like glanced around online looking for like
Hmm.
like just general like opinions of the series and like yesterday after I finished reading it, I like watched some YouTube videos about like I was like, what did I miss? Like, and everyone like had these glowing reviews of it. I just didn't get it, and it's like, but like everyone said, oh, that the second book isn't like quite as good. I'm like,
I've
what
heard
the?
that the second book has resolution on the plot, but we'll see.
Yeah,
Or at least
yeah.
I will.
Didn't your friend Andrew like say like the book ends like in a satisfying way? Like
Yeah, he said it has a very, very satisfying final ending.
I'm interested to know what
Can
his
you follow
definition of
up?
satisfying is. Yeah,
Can you please follow up on what he means?
I will follow up. I'm sure he's talking about the whole series, but I will follow up nonetheless.
maybe. Yeah, because
If Dan, you're not spoiler averse, then yeah, I will find everything out.
I mean like if I heard like oh yeah like the second book is like way better than the first one and it ends like this like awesome way like everything wraps up and like
All right. Well,
yeah yeah
let's get some feedback before we make those promises.
right.
It's now safe to read reviews.
It's times like these that I think about the scope and the depth and the just the incredible feat that Liu Cixin accomplished in Remembrance of Earth's Past, because
Mm.
my eyes were like glued to those pages. Whereas here, there are some parts where some some scene is just playing out and it's just going on and on. And I'm like, but why? Like, I asked myself this question so many times at so many points in this book. Like, why do I care about this? How is this progressing the plot forward? Like, I don't understand. And like you said, Talia, in your initial thoughts on this, I found myself like getting so easily distracted by everything
Hmm.
because I could not keep reading. Like I'd keep going back to the same paragraph like 5 times and couldn't progress past it because I was like, what is happening? Why is he telling me this?
Yeah, definitely. Like I would kind of again more inside stuff around the podcast, but like I wrote the summary for this initially, and like there's a whole part that I didn't put any summary in there because I was like, well, what? Nothing happened. Like nothing of interest that I think is going to be important happened. So I just didn't write anything. So like basically like any time that he was on Maui Covenant, like I just didn't write anything because like they're walking up a mountain for some reason or whatever. Like
Right, like they're doing a work shift. They're doing construction work, basically.
yeah. Yeah, it could have been condensed into like a paragraph.
Well, you know that I think this could almost always be cut down. Even our beloved Liu Cixin. I heard a lot about Tang that I didn't need to hear, and I heard a lot of Cultural Revolution that I did not need to hear.
Yeah, going through that first book again in audiobook format, I was like trying to convince my husband to read the book, and I was just like, just wait until we get past the Cultural Revolution stuff. Just wait. And we were waiting and we were waiting, and I was like, I don't remember waiting this long, but I guess it draws out longer.
The audiobooks take so long compared to reading,
Yeah,
but
exactly. If I
Yeah.
had to listen to this on audiobook, I would lose my mind.
I would stop paying attention, right? Like
Yeah,
it
I
would
would
just
tune
keep
out.
playing and I would be like looking at my phone and be like, oh yeah, I'm listening to a book.
it's so funny you mentioned sharing that with your husband because I told someone I was reading Hyperion and they'd heard really good things. And I said, yeah, like we did it for our podcast. Of course, we started with, our favorite, which was the three body problem. And they said, oh, I love the three body problem. And I was like, really? Like, yeah, but I've only read the first book. Like,
Oh man.
really?
Oh God.
If only I could go back to
Interesting.
that.
Yeah, I think this is probably one of the weaker sci-fi books I've read, and not for a lack of ideas and not for a lack of good prose. There's plenty of good prose. I just think that I think that stories that make a deeper impact on me have a lot more character driven moments and really explore like the depth and the breadth of like the human experience and all of this. And I feel like even though there's so much potential here for that to come across, and in some of the stories it does, it's not coming across as a whole. So that's leaving me thinking like I cannot see myself investing more of my time in this universe.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's kind of telling that, we're supposed to be talking about this book. We end up talking about Three Body Problem more than it seems like. But I think like both Talia and Priya made interesting points around like and the author's capability, right? So like, like we know that this book should have been better just because of like the high points in this book. I don't know, like I'm just thinking about like the Three Body Problem series and like Leo Shin as a writer, like he is not good at writing characters, right? Like that's just like a known fault of his. Like some of the characters like have good moments, right? But like overall, like they're mostly just like plot devices, right? But Priya, like you say, like you're super into books with characters, and like, but that still gripped you, but because of just like the all the other plot elements and like the way that everything comes together. So I just thought that was interesting, even with his fault, I think. I mean, would you agree that he's not the best at writing characters?
At times.
Yeah.
So I think that there are some characters that he did a fairly decent job of writing. And um when you see a character like Ye Ong, she has clear motivations for what she does. She has a she has had these experiences that guide her towards a certain action. We follow her trajectory that leads her to a certain point. So in that sense, I don't think that he is bad at writing characters. And I also come from a place where one of my favorite genres, and like confession time, is romance fantasy. So not the cheesy romances that you found in your basement, Dan, but fantasy with romance elements in it. The more fantasy elements there are, the better. And those books are usually very strongly character driven, and the characters are very like their emotional and mental motivators are very clearly written out for the reader. So these are the kinds of books that I gravitate towards. Like I always end up comparing how these books flesh out their characters to how characters come across in sci-fi, which is another one of my favorite genres. And sometimes there's like overlap, like with fantasy and sci-fi. So I feel like if you are not going to have very strong characters, you need to have a very, very strong plot, like a bulletproof plot that's going to guide your story forward. Even if you like for example, in Remembrance of Earth's Past, you have characters who come into the picture only to be then booted from the story. And when you have so many characters going in and out like that, you need to have a plot that grips the reader like nothing else. Here, we don't have characters that grip you throughout the story. You only have snippets of them. And then you also don't have a plot that's coming together in any kind of meaningful way. And I don't think that an entire book can be entirely exposition for your second book. Even though some would argue that Three Body Problem Book 1 is that, I don't completely agree, because there is a lot of setup and there's a lot of concise world building, versus here we have just a random assortment of facts about this universe and about this world of Hyperion, which is not connected yet to the larger universe in any kind of meaningful way, I would argue.
I think the only character in this whole chapter that I cared about was Mike, and he got killed. He was the only interesting character. He was
Rest
funny.
in peace.
Oh, poor Mike. I mean, my favorite parts in the chapters that I did not care for were when the poet says something snarky and then he literally gets pushed around, whipped around like a human punching bag. That's my favorite thing. Everyone's always grabbing his throat and like pulling him up into the air like he weighs nothing. So
My
Yeah.
favorite part is
I
how
enjoy
he
that.
seems to have, like Mallory Archer, an unlimited supply of alcohol.
Yes, an unlimited supply of snark and alcohol.
I mean, the good news is that, like his chapter is like rocketed up the charts for me. Now it's like just the number 5 with a bullet.
I mean, wouldn't you say that the poets chapter is actually far better than these past two, Dan?
Uh, I'd still go with like the detective's tale over the poet's one.
It brought us the drug flashback. That's so cool.
Yeah, I mean, there's interesting parts of it, but like like I think the kind of technology parts of the detective's tale like were more interesting to me than just like the difficulty of reading the poet's chapter for me made it too difficult. And again, maybe it's because I have no previous knowledge of John Keats or poets or literature, like high-minded literature in general. Like I'm just read sci-fi for this podcast, but I think that's why it didn't strike me quite as as well as you two probably.
Something I didn't adore but didn't mind maybe as much as you two was the relationship that played out between Marin and Siri. Like those big time gaps. It just to me felt like a modern day sailor and port girl story. I did think it was done better in Orson Scott Card's book Speaker for the Dead. Ender, meets her on her planet, much like we meet Siri on her Maui Covenant. He's been trained as a military commander. He has this job that's really fleshed out. But what's interesting about that is she also has a job. Like she's a scientist. She has her own career that happens, and then the age gap happens because she gets older and older, as opposed to sorry, in the same way that the woman ages. But the time dilation is addressed by them in a more interesting and unique way than just shock at the fact that her body is different. So I'd still recommend reading Ender's Game up to about Speaker for the Dead. I can't remember if that's like the second or third in the series. But yeah, it reminded me of that story and I didn't mind it. I didn't mind the reminder.
I think of the three I guess romantic stories that we have in this book, I think this one had the most potential to be the one that I cared about because I feel like there is something there, there is this character has the potential to be a very remarkable character, and this relationship has the potential to come across as being as deep as what the writer is trying to convince us that it was. It's just that the narrator, in my notes I wrote that he just fails at conveying any of this because he seems to me like a dullard. So that's my problem with it.
I think like for me, like I didn't even understand what was happening. Like I didn't understand like the time jumps initially for a while. It's because like I don't know, it's difficult to read and maybe I was skimming because it was I don't know, not good. But yeah, I didn't even get like that aspect until much later. Till because they had like these and they kept like jumping back and forth and just really difficult to know like what was happening and when and why.
I think I even stopped like trying to figure out the chronology at a certain point because I was just like, it doesn't even matter because these memories are not even being presented in any type of order to me, it seemed. Because
Yeah.
like at some point
Right.
he's remembering her when
Exactly.
she's like 70. At another time, he's remembering her when she was actually 16. At another time, and it's not never in order that these memories are shown to us. So I think that it honestly didn't even matter to keep track of that.
And I
Yeah.
would say in Ender's Game, it only matters because it's done with full awareness by both characters. They like make this plan. It's like, all right, you're going to come see me. I'm going to be like 40 years older. And they're like, great. And then he gets on a spaceship and goes. Uh, it's not this like shock and surprise and, oh, you left and what's happening now? And I'm surprisingly pregnant. So I did feel like it was handled with a little bit more maturity, but who knows if it would hold up. I read that book a long time ago. Less cynical than I am now.
And I guess like why was it like so disjointed and like so like out of order? And I mean like there's no narrative benefit to it by doing that.
It's almost like stylistic in terms of, and I mean, you may disagree with the style of it. I don't necessarily agree with it, but I think it it comes across to me as meant to sound like a stream of consciousness, like this guy is just speaking into a device, recording his memories. How memory is often disjointed and not chronological. Your mind just flits from one time to another time based off of which memories are triggered when and how. I think that's the intention there behind this flipping back and forth, like perhaps to connect an insight that Siri shared, or an experience that connected him to something. But the way that your mind doesn't spell everything out for you in this recording that we are supposedly reading like a transcript of, it's not spelled out for you. I think that Siri is a person who had all these insights into the preservation of our planet's culture and ecosystem. But I think that the narrator whose perspective we are taking to view this story is not really giving her anything in return. And that's what made this entire interaction break down for me, because he's not giving her anything. Like, he's not giving her any insight of his own. He's not giving her any words of endearment, even.
Mm.
And I feel like everything feels a little one-sided. Like, she's the one with all the thoughts, and he's the one just listening. And there are many moments where she's like, do you understand what I'm saying? And he at first says no, which is the truth. He does not. And then later on, she's just like, do you understand what I'm saying? And he's like, yes. And then he like parenthetical,
but really, no.
But I did not. But I did not understand her. You know, these women, they just keep talking. So,
but true to life, though, like, I don't know how often either of you have the opportunity to talk to someone who is like in their early 20s. And, there's so much of life that is like lived experience. And you'll say, like, but do you get it? And I think it's very true to life that someone in their early 20s would be like, yes, parenthetical, no. Like, she's raised 2 children. She's had this whole life. And for him, it's been like a couple days.
Which begs the question, what does she see in this guy?
She's only slept with one person in her life. So needs to get off the island, I guess. He says like she's a rube, like she's never traveled, never had mRNA treatments, never done Farcaster, never smoked a cannabis stick, which made me feel like smoking the marijuana, smoking the I don't know, the funny ways that people speak about THC. Just a more sheltered life, but with more wisdom and more experience.
It's funny, that whole list of things that he wrote out that she had not experienced, like all of them, nearly all of them sounding to me like, well, that's what made Siri special.
Oh.
But we don't really get so much of that because we're getting it from his perspective. Like, I almost wish that we got a recording from Siri's perspective instead of from this guy's perspective. I think
more Siri, more dolphins.
Yeah, totally.
That's our advice. Hey, the author's still alive. Maybe he'd take your critique, Priya.
Oh God, but he got the Hugo Award, and now I'm like, who is handing out these Hugo Awards?
Yeah.
Can you please? Maybe I can send my critique to them instead.
That might be better served.
I mean, yeah. I mean, I guess he got it just because like it's an accomplishment that he wrote like basically like six stories and like 6 different genres in like one book, and then like I mean there are some interesting world building elements as part of it, right? Like I'm kind of interested in like the world in general, right? Like how and like what's also happening on Hyperion. but not enough to like read the next one.
I mean, a lot of these concepts feel truly unique, like the strike and the time tombs, and
Mhm.
it's just sad that we didn't get more details on that because it's like he was trying to cram a lot of things into one book, and some concepts are more interesting than others, which readers want to explore further, but the book didn't really give us that. So, I think that it is quite a feat in technical writing. Like technically, as far as writing and prose goes, I think that this definitely like with better content and better presentation of the content, the prose could take it so far, I feel.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like it just needed like one more chapter, right? Of like what happens, like or
Yeah.
any kind of like resolution to like but it's just like stops. Like,
I
and
really think that that is the next book. I don't know, obviously, because the hosts have not read it.
yeah,
But yeah, because I agree. Like the anti-entropic tombs and like Kassad saying he's seen which of them is like impaled on the Shrike tree. There was a lot of suspense, and I am so curious.
but the problem is like it did such a bad job at ending this book. Like, I just don't trust him enough to like invest my time in reading the next one. Like, it's just like, and I think it's even longer than this one, and this one felt long. So yeah, I don't know. Like, it doesn't seem worth it to me.
I think we will have to find another sci-fi book for our next project
Yeah, I think so.
because I know because of these tendencies to deviate from what should be a linear plot, I know that the next book is not going to be all revelations and everything that was missing from the first book. I can just tell. I can
Yeah.
just tell.
Well, we'll just have to go back to Foundation, right?
Oh God, Dan, no, not that. I would rather go back to Dune if I'm being honest.
Let's bring on Dune, Children of Dune.
Well, we have basically concluded our finale on Hyperion with the admission that we would rather be reading any other book, literally, but this one. So there you have it.
So I guess like the question is like, are there worse books that you've read? I mean, I think Talia, you said Ready Player One maybe is worse. I don't know.
Definitely. I would
Yeah.
rather read Hyperion Part 2 right now, live on the air, than read Ready Player One. Ready Player One was adapted into a movie, and that was far better than the book. And it was like okay, because it was directed by Spielberg.
Hmm.
So it's all Spielberg's. I can list lots of bad books, but Bria, take it away.
You're not gonna like this answer,
Uh-oh.
but some parts of Foundation were a
Wow.
worse book than this one.
Well, okay, that's not
But
fair. Because like,
but not worse than this chapter.
well, and that's not fair because like, I would
Pick
say
a new
like
book. I don't think that counts.
you need to take the book as a whole, right? Because like I said, like some of these chapters in this book are great. Like I would if I just read The Scholar's Tale, like this would be like fantastic, like way up
Oh,
there, and
so
like
good.
yeah. So yeah, I would say like all right, so like now it's decision time for Priya, like Hyperion as a whole, or the first Foundation book.
Um, I would say now I don't even remember which Foundation book I liked the least.
It had to be the first one. Well, I mean, just from my recollection of you talking about it, like it, because like
I
I
think
think
were
I
rating on all of
disliked the
them.
first one. I
no,
don't
because like I
remember
think
now.
you like the mule story later on, and like the stuff with like with Arcady later on. I think yeah, like
Maybe the third Foundation I hated the most.
did you?
And
No,
What's a book that's
I think
not
like sorry.
Foundation that you dislike, Bria?
do I have to tell everyone what I hated more than Hyperion?
No, of course
Are,
not.
No, I hated nothing more than Hyperion.
No, you're not required, obviously.
My answer is I hated Hyperion the most.
really? I mean, like if it's
I'm
really
gonna
Foundation,
send you
that's
a
fine.
copy of
But
Ready Player One. You're gonna change it.
When I updated my Goodreads to say that I finished Hyperion at last, I gave it 3 stars, but I think that may have been generous.
hmm.
I think I'm going to demote it to 2 stars.
I would say it's at least a 3-star book. I like The
think
Poet's
so?
Tale, I like The Scholar's Tale, and I like The Priest's Tale so much.
Yeah.
So
Okay, so 3 stars for those 3 stories, I suppose is fair.
I would say those are high points, but I'd still probably give it a 2, just because like I wouldn't recommend people read it, even with those high points.
Well, I tend to not recommend 3-star reads.
Oh,
No.
Hail Mary was kind of cringy. Like I loved the ideas that it was trying to do, but it was just the Martian's character.
Project Hail Mary, you didn't like
Yeah.
that? I loved that.
No, there's nothing to not like it, but it's a very like simple book. Like I would happily recommend it to like a 10-year-old, but I
It is,
wouldn't
but it was
recommend
so
it in good
endearing.
conscience to an adult.
It was so endearing, though.
Sure, but it's clumsy.
Sure. I mean, I don't think that he's like a profound storyteller.
No, but it's like a potato chip book. Like it feels really good as you're listening or reading it. It's very enjoyable, but it doesn't leave any.
Yes, I agree with that.
So
I don't
fun to
think
read.
I don't think it leaves a lasting impression, if that's what you mean. It didn't change my life in any kind of way.
Correct. So like, I don't know. I think it's hard to tell from a star rating alone.
Okay, well, any more hate we want to pour on this book, or should we call it a season?
That's our finale.
Yeah. All right. Well, yeah, thanks for listening. Please check out rehydrate.space for release episodes, reading lists, and all the other stuff we put up there. Please leave comments by emailing us at rehydrate@fastmail.com, on Twitter at rehydratepod, and on Mastodon at rehydrate@mast.to. And join us next season. We'll be almost certainly not reading the next book of Hyperion, but we will inform the readers of which book we have decided to do next.